All right, Ki Teitzei, when you go out. Deuteronomy 21:10 to 25:19. All right, now we've got a lot to cover here. A lot came up in this Torah portion. All right, so for all of you that are online, please relax about typing in any questions and listen to what I cover, because I'm going to tell you right now, if I didn't cover it, it's because I'm not going to cover it. Because there are things in this Torah portion that I'm not interested in covering at the moment. I have to balance the amount of time and prioritize, what I'm going to cover. So some things I'm not going to cover, and some of you are going to type it in anyway, and I'm going to end up having to tell you I'm not covering it, but that's okay. All right. You can ask anything about anything I do cover. Okay, so I'm not trying to restrict what you ask. If I didn't cover it, there's a reason I didn't cover it. When I get to those things, I'll tell you I'm not covering this. All right, now. And some of you are thinking, oh, why? Because you don't know the answer? No, because there's probably not enough time to get into something that needs a long, long answer, okay? Or something that just doesn't have anyway, we'll get there, I'll explain. All right, now, so chapter 21, and we can begin here in verse 10, okay? In verse 10. So it says, when you go out to fight against your enemies, and Yahweh your Elohim shall give them into your hand, and you take them captive. Okay, so this whole thing is when a man desires a woman that's captive. Okay, they went to battle. Okay, we will make the assumption that in the battle, men are dying, because generally the women were not doing the fighting, and so then there were women without men. And so they're basically uncovered, unprotected, because now the battle has been finished. And so somebody may just desire those women. Usually the raping and pillaging crowd would just do the raping and pillaging. But in this case, it's talking about what Israel's saying. If you maybe find one that you desire to protect, to cover, to marry, to whatever, this is how it goes. Okay? Now, it says, and you shall see among the captives a woman fair of form, and shall delight in her to take her for your wife. Now it's going to say, well, we're going to test that a little bit. Okay, if you really want her for your wife, and you're not just all, hot for her, so to speak, okay, well, what we're going to have you do is we're going to have you shave her head and trim her nails and, basically take away what would normally be the trappings of beauty and see how you feel at that point, okay? All right, so just again, nothing for today. We don't really do these things today. Of course, I didn't say this at the beginning, but of course, we're always looking for what can we take, and I'm going to emphasize the things that we can, take out of this portion and apply today. What can we do today with what we're learning, right? Okay, now, then we continue in 15 through 17. It says, when a man has two wives. Now, I want you to notice something. Every now and then in Scripture, it mentions somebody with two wives. Every now and then it mentions rules about if you have. What you never find is anything requiring you to have. There's no commandment to have two wives or more. There's no commandment, all right? So all you guys out there get all excited about this, calm down, okay? It is not commanded to have two wives. Some people did. So it's also not commanded not to have more than one, okay? Okay, although for kings it says don't take yourself many wives. Okay, and we read that a week ago or 2 weeks ago, right? Now, that being said, okay, there's some rules saying if you're going to have two wives, we want to make sure that we are not diminishing the position and respect and honor to the first one. So that this never becomes, guys, about, well, I'm 50 years old now and my 48-year-old wife, and, there's this little 28-year-old over here that looks really cute. So we don't want you trading because of whatever your eyes and the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes is causing you to do. That's number one. Of course, can we also say that everywhere in Scripture that we are told how the two wives thing came about, it was the wife number one that kind of brought the second one in, not the man? The man never in Scripture do you see him say, hey, honey, I was thinking of bringing this other lady in. And she's thinking, that's such a great idea. By the way, every woman that did do this regretted it. They regretted it. Every one of them. That we read. We read about how they did not like it. Okay? Not a good idea. All right, so if your wife is not the one pushing this, it's a zero issue. All right, completely non-issue. You are not to sell her on the idea. You're not to pressure her on the idea. Besides, if you live in this country, it's illegal. Okay? You want to be a Mormon and move to Utah, that's a different problem. But generally speaking, it's illegal. Okay? Now, someone might say, but if Yahweh never told you to do this. He said, if you do it, there are rules. If. It says, when a man has, and of the two wives, and one is loved and the other is unloved. Boy, did we not see that in Scripture with Jacob? Right? Okay, one is loved, the other is unloved, and they have children, both the loved and the unloved. The firstborn, let's say, is of the unloved, then it shall be that that's the one that gets the inheritance. In other words, you don't get to say, but I don't love her, I like the other one better now. Okay? And so let's understand that the firstborn is still the firstborn. Okay? The firstborn is still the firstborn. Now, I want you to also get something else out of this verse. I added this in my notes today while you guys are reading. Okay, in verse 16, it says, then it shall be on the day he makes his sons to inherit his possessions, he's not allowed to treat the son of the beloved wife as firstborn in the face of the son of the unloved, who truly is the firstborn. But I want you to hear this part. On the day that he gives the inheritance. In other words, they didn't wait to do this based on a will after they died. They gave inheritance while they were alive. Okay? This is why Yeshua talks about in Mark 7 the idea of, well, you got many traditions that are problematic. Like the one that says, hey, I don't need to take care of my parents with the inheritance I got. I can just give it away to the temple as a donation. Okay, as korban, as an offering. Because the inheritance is given while you're alive. You give it so that your children take care of everything in you, and they learn how to handle everything so that when you die, it transfers smoothly. The transition is smooth. So maybe some of you need to think about that. Because some of you are wondering, well, I wonder if my kids or this or that will all handle things right. Well, why don't you deal with it before you die? There are things you can deal with before you die. All right? Because otherwise, it can be a nightmare. All right? All right. So for some of you, you have older parents, okay? The house they have that they want you to split or however it's going to get inherited, they should do that right up front. Transfer that house to somebody with the intention that it'll be split and divided amongst whatever when they pass and that kind of a thing, okay? All right. And I'm saying this from my own experience, all right? I own my mother's house. She has a life estate, which means she can live it in until she dies. I can't throw her out, but it's my house now. So my brothers, when I sell it, we'll split it in the way she wants. And they know that, and I have that, but the inheritance is already handled. You see what I'm saying? Plus, this way, the government can't get involved, and probate doesn't get involved, and other stuff gets involved. It's already been handled. Okay? And it's been that way now for 5 or 6 years. Okay? All right, just throwing that out there. All right, so, because the verse says here, basically, how the inheritance is going to be dealt with before they die. Interesting, right? Interesting. Okay, now, what else did I want to say here? All right, let's go to verse 18. All right? When a man has a wayward and rebellious son who is not listening to the voice of his father or his mother, and when they discipline him, does not listen to them, then his father and mother are going to take him and bring him to the elders and stone him out by the gates and everything. Okay, now, first of all, according to the sages and the histories and whatever, Judah claims that was never ever done. Okay? However, you can see that could be a pretty good deterrent to bad behavior. Now, I want us to be really clear, though, on something that's important. Because I don't think I've ever said this before, because it just didn't seem to come up in my thoughts. This is not talking about a child. Because everybody thinks, oh, they're going to stone a child. No, he's a glutton and a drunkard. This isn't a kid. Okay? Now, because even no matter where you go far back, children were not drinking and doing all that stuff. That's adult behavior. Okay? So this is an adult. So I'm going to say for us, you can't really bring them to the elders and have them stoned. You really can't do much with them. But what you can do, kick them out of the living room couch or the basement or wherever they are in your house and make sure they're outside away from you doing all this nonsense. Then just go, not my problem anymore. They're their own problem. Anybody in their own experience, I'm just asking, either your personal experience because you were a child, because all of you were, or you've had children, or you've watched other people's children. Generally speaking, do they listen real well? Did you listen real well? No. They think for themselves, don't they? Okay, says the little one over here is 9 years old is doing this. Okay. Yeah, but you're old enough we can smack you around a little bit. All right. What'd you say, amen? All right, his father said amen. Okay, so see that, Constantine? You got your father gave me permission to smack you around. All right, now, of course, he's done that a long time ago, so I've always had that permission. Now, look, but he's a good kid. I'm just teasing him. Now, just understand this was meant as a deterrent, okay? And it was talking about an adult, because remember, in those days, we had basically like clan families, where you had generational families together as like the clan of your family, right? Where the whole clan lived together generationally. So of course you're going to have some adults who are your children that may be acting up. That's when you say, you need to be out of here. Because why do we need to have them not be there? Because the one bad apple does spoil the bunch. We are susceptible to the negative influences of other people. Okay, we tend to imitate. The good behavior person going into the bad group doesn't turn them all good. They will turn him bad. Okay? Now, you get a group of bad, you put one good in there, it's not going to fix anything. But somehow, when you have a group of good, you stick one bad in there, it'll start messing the whole thing up. It's just the way it works. Okay? Now, all right. Verse 22 and 23, of course, we think of this when we talk about the idea of not leaving Yeshua on the tree. You know, when a man has committed a sin worthy of death, then you shall put to death, you'll hang him on a tree, let not his body remain overnight. Why is that the rule? Okay, I don't think I've said it this way before, so make note, it's not a big deal. Because what was the point of leaving them on the crucifixion, out on a stake, on a tree or whatever? What was the point of that? What kind of death was that? Shaming. That's right, shaming. Good job. Okay? So this is intended to be punishment, not public shaming. So they're killed on the tree, and then they're taken down, because the point was to have that punishment be done, not to do a public shaming. Okay, we were just hanging them out there. Okay. Whereas that's why they took Yeshua down, because they said, according to our rules, we have to take him down. And, they're like, but we put him up there purposely to be public shame. It's supposed to be public shaming. That's what the Romans were all about at that time, okay? All right, then we get to chapter 22. All right, the first couple of verses there. This is an aspect of loving your brother. All right, when you see your brother's ox or a sheep going astray, you're not going to hide yourself from them, but you're going to return to your brother. In other words, you see something, and you go and you do something, it's your brother's, and you help to return the thing, okay? If your brother's not near you, or if you do not know him, then you shall bring it to your own house, and it shall be with you until your brother seeks it, and then you shall return it to him. Verse 2 makes it clear that we're not necessarily talking about a physical blood brother. It's simply saying, if you're part of Israel, you're brothers, okay? Because it says, if your brother's not near you, or if you don't know him, you just know it belongs to one of the brothers, so to speak, the members of the community, then when you find out that he's looking for it, you go, oh, I've got it. I found it, didn't know it was yours, and here it is, right? Okay? And so you do with his donkey, so you do with his garment, so you do with whatever belongs to your brother, basically. Whatever he loses, which he has lost and you have found. You are not allowed to hide yourself, okay? So this is important. He's trying to say, look, if you don't take advantage of the situation, be a blessing to your brother. Now, when you see your brother's donkey or ox has fallen down on the way, you're not going to hide yourself from them. Help him raise them without fail. So he doesn't say hide yourself. In other words, don't just turn a blind eye and walk away. Don't act like you didn't see it or you don't know about it. Not like you're hiding, but that's just the idiomatic phrase to mean don't ignore it, okay, and act like you didn't see it and that you're not aware of it, okay? All right, so you're going to help him raise them without fail. Okay, now we're going to get into some of the fun stuff. All right, now, this section is going to be, it says what it says and nothing more, okay? Let's not read more than it says for right now. Let's just read what it says. A woman does not wear that which pertains to a man, nor does a man put on a woman's garment, for whoever does this is an abomination to Yahweh your Elohim. Okay, so it says, clothing-wise, it says the man doesn't wear a woman's clothing, okay, as far as a garment is concerned. But a woman, it says, doesn't wear that which pertains to a man. What could that be? It doesn't say, okay? So we'll let it be what it is. Whatever is, in other words, whatever you would look at when you could tell, you know, in a binary way, genders apart, okay? And all of this is against gender confusion, so that visually you should be able to know if you're looking at a man or a woman. That's what it says. I'm just reading it to you. All of the internet's going to get mad at me now, but I'm just reading what it says. So when it says a woman doesn't wear that which pertains to a man, it should be obvious to someone who's looking at her that she's not wearing something that should be worn by a man. Now, what this is not saying, Baptists and the rest of you out there, all right, is that women can't wear pants. I don't know where the church guys got that out of. Women wear pants, and by the way, they don't look like men's pants. They have a definitely different fit to it, okay? But nobody was wearing pants when this was written. They hadn't been invented yet, okay? Everybody was wearing robes of some sort. And so there must have been a difference between the men's robes and the women's robes so you could tell them apart. Just like a woman could wear a shirt like I am, a polo, and it would look different than the ones that are for men, or a button shirt or whatever it is, they're designed to look different for the man and for the woman. So there's no confusion there, all right? So let's just keep that in mind. But certainly for all the modern day church, you know, control freaks and whatever they are, it has nothing to do with pants, okay? If anything, everybody was wearing skirts or robes or something like that. There were no pants. You know, you ever go watch the old movies? Do you see anybody wearing pants? Go watch the Exodus movies. Who's wearing pants? Nobody. Okay? Now, I don't know when they were invented, but not here. All right? Okay, continuing. Then it says, and this is sort of a separate thought, but it has to still fit into the context of seeing something and being aware, okay? We're still in the context of seeing something and being aware. It says, when you come upon a bird's nest along the way, in any tree or on the ground with young and the eggs, etc., that you're going to let the mother go and keep the young. All right, well, all right, so then the mother can go ahead and make more young and then keep the whole thing going, okay? If you take the mother and the young, you've just ended the whole thing. Okay, you just ended the whole thing. All right, now, so he says, look, just be aware, just like being aware that it's not your donkey, it's not your ox, it's not your garment, whatever it is from the earlier verses, okay? It's an awareness. All right, now, then it says when you build a new house, you're going to put a parapet around your roof. Why? Because back then it was very common. So by the way, you don't need to put a fence around your roof. Why don't you need to do it? Oh, I thought you guys said you keep the law. Well, but this law had a very specific purpose. Why? Because people lived on the roof. When they visited your house, they would then put a little mattress or something and sleep on the roof. And you didn't want them to roll off. When was the last time you saw anybody sleeping on a roof? Most houses have roofs that are slanted. You couldn't do it anyway. They don't have flat roofs in a lot of houses. Okay, so it's not that this law has been done away with. There's just no reason for it. Nobody does this anymore. Right? Nobody. It's like saying, well, what about all the things that have to do with the temple? Well, nobody does that anymore. There's no temple. Okay? Yes, if you were to have people ever stay on a building that's yours, you would have to put a fence around it. Okay? A parapet around the roof. Okay. Let's see. What else we have here? Then we have this do not mix. This is one of the ones I don't want to get into big fights with and arguments with. It says what it says. So maybe I was wrong about what I said earlier. It's not that I'm not going to cover stuff. We're just going to leave it that it says what it says. All right? It says here, do not sow a vineyard with different kinds of seed, lest the yield of the seed which you have sown and the fruit of your vineyard be defiled. Does anybody know what that really means? Maybe someone who's ever had a vineyard knows what that means. I don't. Different kinds of seed, meaning, am I talking about different types of grapes, or am I talking about grapes and some other type of seed, vegetation? It doesn't say, okay? They knew, because it was written to them. We're guessing, because it wasn't written to us. We're reading it, because there's information here for us, okay? Now, just so you understand. Now, then it says, do not plow with an ox and a donkey together. So why would that be a problem? Well, you're going to get a not straight line. The stronger animal is going to pull, and the other one's not going to keep it straight. Okay, that's something I learned about plowing fields. If you don't have two equal animals, the stronger one is easily going to pull it in a different direction. All right? Then we get to where we have some more fun. Do not put on a garment of different kinds of wool and linen together. Okay, so don't call me up, as often happens, and say, well, can I wear this thing? It's polyester and it's cotton and it's okay. Is it wool and linen? See, that's what it says. If it's not wool and linen, let's not worry about it, okay? It's talking about wool and linen. Oh, no, it says there are different kinds of, well, it's talking about wool and linen. That's my interpretation. You can go with your own interpretation, okay? Now, why is wool and linen an issue? Because both of those are things, especially that we used when we were talking about garments with the temple, okay? And if you're into understanding the energetics of things, the frequency of wool and the frequency of linen are both very high, which means that they're very healthy, which is why hospitals always used linen, which is interesting because that helped in I don't know if they knew it or not when they first started using it, but there was linen used in hospitals, okay? And wool and linen, though, when you put them in the same garment, the benefit cancels each other out. The frequencies clash. And so you lose the value. Wool, by the way, has a similar value if it's just wool. And so these are very good garments, which is why most of the stuff people wore, if you go back far enough, was either wool, cotton, or linen, okay? And so that's just simple there. Now, so let's just stick with the garment issue and the different kinds. Let's just stick to wool and linen. Then it says, verse 12, make tassels on the four corners of your garment. Okay, so interesting that all of a sudden the seat verse pops up. Well, why do you think that is? Well, I'll give you a simple answer. Because he just gave them a bunch of stuff that they're supposed to remember, and the seat are to make you remember. Okay, here's mine, right? You can see it there, okay? I mean, it's to make you remember. It's there to cause you to remember. Numbers 15 says, in verse 38 through 41, it says, and you shall have these to remind you to keep the commandments. And he just gave you some things that were about you remembering some things. All right, so make sure you have your garments cornered thing. Now, could that also have to do with 4 or 5 verses earlier talking about for women not to wear what pertains to a man? Maybe. I've made that case in the past. I'm not going to try to make that case now. So I'm not saying anywhere in Scripture it does, because it certainly doesn't. There's no place in Scripture that says women can't wear tzitzit, okay? I can tell you traditionally they didn't. Okay, the men did. But there's no verse that tells you not to wear them, so I'm never going to tell you not to wear them. I'm going to ask you to make them with white with one blue and not make them every color in the rainbow, and because that's not what the verse is saying in Numbers 15. It says take one strand and dye it blue. That doesn't mean do whatever you want with the other ones, which is the way people interpret it, because people want to interpret things to their best advantage. It says leave them the way they were when you took them from the sheep, which they would have gone for the whitest ones they could find and make one strand blue. Why would they go for the whitest ones? Because otherwise you wouldn't see the blue. The whole point was the blue. And it wasn't even blue, it was techelet, which is like a type of blue, okay? And so for all of you out there wearing yellow and orange and red and pink and purple and whatever else in your seat, I think you're making a mistake and you're missing the point. It's not a fashion statement, it's obedience, okay? It's not an accessory to go with your outfit. Just saying, all right? Now, if you've got tzitzit, by the way, that you wear for work and everything else, and they're so dirty that you still almost can't tell the blue from the white, you might need a new set. Just saying. And if you don't want to buy them, learn how to make them. All right? Now, and we have videos for that on our YouTube. All right, let's see. Where are we up to here? Now we get to chapter 22, into verse 22, right? Now we're going to get into some of this whole sexual men-women shenanigans, all right? Let's follow this along, okay? The first thing is lying with a married woman, okay? When a man is found lying with a married woman, both shall die. Just to summarize what it says, okay? Then we get to verse 23 to 27, lying with an engaged maiden in the city or in the field. And they treat engaged like she's married. Okay, they treat engaged like she's married. Now, what's the difference? The difference is that if it's in a place where there's lots of people, she had a responsibility to cry out. Okay? If she cried out, then only he was to have fault. If she didn't, then they would both. Okay? They give her the benefit of the doubt that if it's out in the field where nobody would hear, that if she had cried out, nobody would have heard it. Okay? So, that's what it says there. Again, like it, don't like it. I'm just reading to what it says. Right? Lying with an engaged maiden in the city and in the field. Now, then we have verse 28 and 29 says, that what if you're lying with a virgin or a maiden who is not engaged? Okay? So, if you notice in this case, there's no death penalty. The punishment for the gentleman is, and he's not being a gentleman here, but she may have been interested. We see this with Shechem and Dinah. Okay? She wasn't engaged, and he took her. And it seems like she wasn't all that upset about it. Okay? So it says here, when a man finds a girl who is a maiden not engaged, and he seizes her and lies with her, and they are found out, okay? That means they may have been just sneaking around and doing that. He says, well, then the man needs to pay the bride price and marry her, and then he gives up the right to put her away. And that's mentioned actually earlier on as well. This idea of not being able to put her away. Okay, now, so what is that all about? Go listen to the teaching on marriage and divorce, or divorce and remarriage, okay? It's a very complicated thing scripturally in terms of adding the verses up. It's really simple, actually. But it's complicated because it's been taught wrong for so long by so many people, okay? We are going to see it actually worded correctly in here in a minute. But right now, in this section, it's talking about this idea of putting away. End of verse 29 says he is not allowed to put her away all of his days, okay? So there's no putting away. Okay, so putting away is when there is an uncoveredness, there is, let's understand this. In Matthew, when Yeshua says God hates divorce or whatever, it doesn't say that. It says God hates putting away. And just understand that you've been lied to and misrepresented all the time. The Greek does not say divorce there, okay? Putting away is a different thing, because people say, oh, you can't get divorced unless there's this sexual thing. Well, no, that's about putting away. For divorce, you can have almost any reason, all right? But if he takes the woman, no matter what she does, he can't just put her away. Putting away was public shaming, casting her out, letting the world know what she did, which was probably one of the things listed, like when, you sleep with your brother, you sleep with your father, you sleep with whatever other thing that's listed in those verses, those uncovered things, right? Okay, those were the sexual immorality things. It's not about adultery, because adultery already had a death penalty, not a putting away penalty, okay? So it had to be something else. It had to be something else. Now, So this man, he says, look, if you're going to take her, you're going to have to marry her. And because you didn't do it right, you give up your right to put her away. Now you got to have her the whole time. Or it doesn't say he can't divorce her, but divorce frees her to do whatever she wants. Do you understand the difference? Divorce says, we are done. You can do what you want. I can do what I want. We're legally separated, done. There's no more relationship legally, right? Putting away said, I, who put you away, can do whatever I want. I'm now legally unbound. You can never marry again because you've now been scarlet lettered or whatever you want to call it, right? You've been marked in some very shameful way. And so this is a discouragement to treat women this way, because if you do, you lose the right to do these things, okay? Or if you do certain things, you're going to end up dead because it's adultery. Notice that's when it's a married woman, it's adultery. When she's engaged, it's adultery, okay? Under those circumstances, it's adultery. So what was the penalty when it's adultery? Death. All right. Then we get to chapter 23. Now, I want to get into verse 1 real quickly and verse 2. First of all, every year a woman ends up reading these two verses. I don't know why. And then, of course, later on we have it again where there's a situation like that, and again it ends up being a woman reading it. It's just every year works out. All right. But the main point here is it's talking about people that are damaged, okay, wounded, crushed in their genitals, or of illegitimate birth, doesn't enter the assembly of Yahweh. Okay, now, so I don't want anybody thinking that, well, you know what, I was of illegitimate birth, my parents weren't married, or I was out of an adulterous thing, or I came from a rape thing, or whatever it is, or I had some sort of damage to my genitals, or some other damage and this kind of thing, so I can't be in the assembly. That is not what he's saying, okay? Remember, this is for these people coming into the land with certain protections. Remember, there was supposed to be no barren among you. There would be no births like that. There would be none of these things happening, okay? So let's just understand that's a whole different circumstance for a group of people in the land at the time. He called you as you are, knowing you are as you are, okay? With whatever broken, damaged mess you came with, all right? So let's not worry about your birth defected child or your damage from some injury or some other thing that, okay, now he's not going to let me in. That is not what this is talking about. What exactly is it talking about? We don't know. We don't know. But we see from other examples that that's not the problem, okay? Now, he does say, an Ammonite or a Moabite does not enter the assembly of Yahweh even to a 10th generation. Now, so Ammonite and Moabite, we know that these were the children that came from the incestuous thing with Lot and his daughters. Now, that being said, okay, this plays out interestingly because it brings us to the book of Ruth, okay? And Ruth was a Moabitess, but yet she's in the assembly and she's in the generations lineage of Messiah. So what it's trying to tell you is it's about the citizenship, not the birth line, okay? That's what the book of Ruth is there for. The one purpose of that book more than anything else, well, there's a second thing that's going to come up in here with the levirate marriage. But the main point of that book was to show you that no matter what you were born, if you change citizenship, then that's what all that matters. She said, your God is my God, your people my people, your ways my ways. Citizenship changed. No longer a Moabitess, now an Israelite. No Moabitess is in Yeshua's lineage or in David's lineage. Remember, David comes a few more generations from her, okay? Excuse me. So that verse, and that was less than 10 generations by the time you get there. It's like 2 or 3 by the time you get to David. It's just a few, all right? Now, as a matter of fact, you get to Ruth and that whole thing, it's less than 10 from when Moses is writing this, okay? So we can't even say, well, it was after the 10th generation. No, and by the way, saying even up to the 10th generation is trying to say like forever, okay? It's not trying to say count literally to 10 and then you're good. All right. Now, then we get to my favorite section, which I write, handle your poop correctly for Yahweh walks in your midst. I don't say that to be funny, okay? He's giving you a very good picture of, literally because of health issues and animals and everything else, that if you have to use the restroom that way, you would go out, you dig a hole, you take care of it, you bury it and that kind of thing. But the point is, you don't want where you live and where Yahweh is going to walk amongst you to smell like that and be attracting all of the things that it would attract, bugs and everything else. But I think that it's a metaphor also for the same thing, okay? Be careful. You guys are like, some of you in metaphorical ways are basically pooping all over the place and you're not realizing, but that's in your midst. He's walking around and you're just doing that all over the place in a not literal way. So I think that's kind of a picture that I like to get out of that. All right, now, what else I want to cover here? When you make a vow to Yahweh, pay it quickly. It's not sin to abstain from vowing. Okay, that's in verses 21 to 23. Oh, I want to talk about the 23, 19 through 20. All right, it says, do not lend at interest to your brother. Okay, it says, do not lend to your brother at interest of silver, interest of food, or interest of whatever is lent at interest, and to a foreigner you can lend at interest. Now, this is not saying what you might want to think it's saying, okay? If your brother has a need, not a want, but a need, and you're going to lend to help him with that need, you should not charge him any interest. If your brother has a want and comes to you like a businessman and asks you as a business dealing, hey, can you spot me some money so I can do this thing, and then you get some interest out of it for putting your money at risk, that's not what this is talking about, okay? Your brother's hungry, has no money for food, and you're going to lend him some money so he can go get food, you're not to charge interest. Matter of fact, you shouldn't even be expecting to get it back. But just understand, that doesn't mean that you can't do business where a person says, hey, I've got this great opportunity, but I really need like $5,000 or $10,000 to get this thing done, and I could go to the bank, but I could go to you, and then I can give you a little bit of, for help, for your risk at it. That is allowed. That is not what this is talking about, okay? This isn't about business. This is about what your brother needs and taking advantage of your brother. Does that make sense? Because remember, they don't have to go to you. They could go to someplace else. They could go to a bank. They could wherever, if they're going to borrow, okay? Now, of course, if it's something really small, why would you even, just here, okay? But if you're at risk, you should get something to mitigate your risk, to make that risk worthy. But that's when your brother explains to you, this is risky, but I could really use this, and if you want to help me out here, I'd be willing to give you something when it works out, right? So don't think this says that you can't do business with your brother and make anything, for the risk, okay? That is not what this is about. This is about taking advantage. Your brother's in need, and you take advantage of him. There's lots of verses about that, by the way, that have to do with, for example, when you know that the Shemitah year is coming or the Jubilee year is coming, and don't take advantage of your brother, okay? Now, when you make a vow, okay, with 21 to 23, he says, pay it quickly. When you make a vow to Yahweh, your Elohim, do not delay to pay it, okay? Of course, when you abstain from vowing, it's not sin. In other words, stop making vows. It's easier. Okay? All right, then we get to chapter 24, where we get the big section of divorce rules. Okay? When a man takes a wife and shall marry her, then it shall be, if she finds no favor in his eyes because he's found a matter of uncoveredness in her. I explain what that all is in the divorce remarriage teaching. And he shall write her a certificate of divorce, a sefer kritut, and put it in her hand and send her out of his house. Here it literally says certificate of divorce. It doesn't say putting away. He found something, for whatever reason, that she didn't find favor anymore, and he doesn't want to be with her, and he's going to set her free. Now she can marry anybody else she wants to do whatever she wants, okay? And she has the papers to prove it. He says, and if she left his house and went and became another man's wife, which it doesn't say she can't do, she's now free to do that. And that latter husband shall hate her and write her certificate of divorce. Interesting that it says hate. I'd have to really get into the Hebrew there. But in other words, usually divorces happen because somebody's hating somebody or both people are hating each other. There's a lot of bitterness and anger going on. This is probably the right word, okay? Not that there would be good reason for it, but it's probably the way that the people are feeling at that point. There's a lot of hate going on, anger, bitterness, hurt feelings, all that kind of stuff. And he writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house. Now, this is the point here. Well, there's 2 points here. One is you can get a divorce. And 3 points, I guess. Second is, once you give the papers, she can marry somebody else. It's not adultery. See, Christianity has weaponized that if you go ahead and get married after you're divorced, you're committing adultery. That is not true. But what about it? Oh, no. Those are putting away situations, okay? If you've been put away, you can't get married. That's a public shaming punishment. Divorce, you are free as if you weren't married, like you're free to go get married. That's the second thing. Now, the third thing is, this is important, the man who divorces you, all of you guys need to listen to this, men, okay, women too, because nowadays women divorce, by the way, you are allowed to divorce your men. Okay, it doesn't have to be him. Well, what can I do? Doesn't he have? No, you can do it too. Doesn't matter, okay? But listen to this, all right? You can't and should not, it says right here, you don't divorce with an interest to take the other person back, okay? If there's any thought of wanting them back, you don't divorce, okay? I mean, just let's figure that out. It says here, the latter husband hates her, gives her a certificate, puts it in her hand, okay, and sends her out of the house, okay? Or when the latter husband dies, who took her to be his wife, so even after the husband's dead, okay, and she didn't get divorced a second time, but he passes away. The former husband who sent her away is not allowed to take her back to be his wife. Now it says after she's been defiled, well, not defiled, she's had sex with somebody else, but it was in a proper, legitimate marriage way. But listen, the abomination is, why did you get divorced in the first place? I'm not understanding this, right? Because I see lots of people that all of a sudden they want to get back with their ex. It's like, well, why did you get divorced in the first place? If you wanted to get back together, why didn't you fix it in the first place? If you really weren't sure you'd find something better, because that's maybe you did it thinking, well, I'm sure I'll find something better. You should never do that, by the way. You never get a divorce because you think you'll find something better. Get a divorce because you don't want to be with the person anymore. Or they don't want to be with you anymore, whatever it is. But why would you take them back? You shouldn't, in other words, don't take divorce lightly is what it's saying. It's a big deal. It's permanent. Marriage is not, by the way. Divorce is. Isn't that interesting? Marriage is not forever. It could be, should be, but it isn't. Divorce is forever. There's no turning around after that. Divorce is forever. And you should be thinking about that if you get divorced, okay? It is permanent. You can't go back. Now you can marry somebody else, but you can't go back, all right? As far as that relationship is. And again, all of this is in the divorce, remarriage, and putting away teaching, okay? So just so you can kind of figure that out, all right? But I think that this is really important that you guys understand that, okay? Someone who's divorced is free to be single or get married without any sin involved here, okay? I did the teaching, by the way, on divorce and remarriage and putting away because I was tired of people weaponizing it and telling all these people that were in their second marriages that they needed to divorce their second spouse because they were in sin. Nonsense. You guys are train wrecking legitimately good marriages. You guys are sinning and should be ashamed of yourselves, and somebody should smack you guys around. Slap that nonsense out of you. I'm not trying to be violent and all that stuff. You understand what I'm trying to say. You guys have some nerve getting involved in other people's business and telling them they're in sin. And by the way, I'm 99% sure every person that does that, they're doing it because they hate that they can't get divorced. Because in their mind, they can't do it. So they want to punish everybody that did it because they don't think it's fair because they can't do it. But you can do it. But you should not take it lightly. That's what it says here. Okay. Oh, but what about in Matthew? I already told you, the words in Matthew have nothing to do with divorce. It has to do with putting away. All right? That section, I covered for at least 30 minutes in the teaching. And then I'll still get somebody saying, well, what about this verse? You mean the verse I covered for 30 minutes in Greek, and then went to the Hebrew in the Deuteronomy and went everywhere and showed you what it actually says? I can't help it if you can't follow along. You know, it's like the t-shirt somebody just got me, or I have a sign now that says, I can explain it to you, but I can't understand it for you. Okay? It doesn't say what you want it to say. Well, you're going to have to accept that someday. There's lots of things that you've been told it says that it just doesn't say. But it says God hates divorce. In English it does. Was it written in English? No. Was it even written in Greek? No, but let's go to the Greek. It doesn't say that in the Greek. It says putting away in the Greek. Okay? So stop saying that. But it says that. Well, in your translation, in your language it does, but not the way it was written. It wasn't written that way. Putting away is a very different thing. Now, by the way, putting away is still a part of divorce, but it's not done in a public shaming. Okay? Putting away means you are throwing her or getting her out of him or whatever out of your house. But with the certificate, it's now a legal separation document that frees the other person to do whatever without any public shame. Okay? And the public shame is not just people hear you were divorced and that's the public shame. I mean, no, you are publicly outing whatever they did, like to the town. You know? That was a big deal. By the way, do you understand that that's why when you have Messiah, his parents, Joseph finds out that Miriam is pregnant. And what does he decide to do? Put her away. He didn't decide to divorce her. You notice that? It says he was going to put her away. But what did it say that was really weird and different than what we understand or should understand about putting away? It says he wanted to put her away quietly. Well, quietly and putting away are not, like, they don't go together. That was an odd thing for him to do, because putting away was done very loudly, so that people would know this woman did this and you can't marry her. Nobody can marry her. Okay? Now, of course, you'd have to have proof or whatever and that kind of thing. Otherwise, you'd get in all kinds of trouble yourself, as it always is in Scripture. It wasn't just anybody can accuse anybody of anything. But you didn't have to prove anything to just let them go with a divorce. You just didn't need anything except to decide that it says that she finds no favor in my eyes. Or he finds no favor in my eyes, whichever way you want to go on either side of it, where you don't want them anymore. Okay? Marriage, let's just make sure we're clear on this. You know, we got a little bit of time because we didn't have any prayer requests and praises and that kind of thing. Marriage, the way Christianity teaches it, is the only stupid thing you can do that there's no getting out of, there's no fixing, there's no solution for. That's the way they teach it. Making a mistake, marrying the wrong person, there's no solution for that. There's no fix. There's nothing you can do. That's Christianity for you. It's not Scripture. That's not what Yah said and Scripture says. So I'm telling you, especially when you consider that most people who get married do it when they're young and stupid. Can we all admit that? Okay? A lot of people who have had a divorce in their life will say, well, you know, I was 18 or I was 20 and I was dumb and I was, okay, and so that you should have to now spend the next 60 years with because you were stupid? I mean, most things you do that are stupid don't punish you for 60 years. Most, okay? I mean, I guess you can commit a crime or something, you end up in jail, whatever. But I'm saying, but you know, or you could do something and you get some sort of injury or disease that doesn't go away. But generally speaking, most dumb things we do don't last as a problem forever. So what's the solution? There's no solution? Of course, the solution is divorce. Now, this verse is trying to let you know you need to take it seriously. Because you can't take her back. Okay, you can't take him back. You know, it's rough. Look, and I've seen, and I'm not picking on this one group, this one family, but you know what? I've seen some pretty strange things. I've seen a couple that were married and had kids, got divorced. Both of them got married to other people and had kids. Then they got divorced and got back together and had more kids. I was like, I don't even know what to do with that. But they did all of that before they read this. Okay, and if you want to bring grace into anything, where his graciousness and his compassion comes into things, he's compassionate about stuff you did before you knew better, okay? He has compassion for things you do before you know better. He's not going to hold against you what you don't know. You're responsible for, it says that which is revealed belongs to you. So before it was revealed, it belonged to him. So you made some mistakes. You did some dumb things. All right, just want to throw that out there because, I still see this today. There are lots of people that call me up and they're like 68 years old and they've been married for 35, 40 years and they've been miserable for most of that time because they didn't think they could get out. In verbally abusive, emotionally abusive, physically abusive, whatever it was. Sometimes all of that. But they were told they couldn't get out. That's horrible. That's hell on earth. All right. Now, then we get to verse 5. Okay, when a man takes a new wife, let him not go out into the army, nor let any matter be imposed upon him. He shall be exempt for a year for the sake of his home, to rejoice with his wife, whom he's taken. All right. So what's it talking about here? It says men need to focus on their wives, like really focus. I don't mean like stop focusing after the first year, but I mean give them and give your whole relationship an extra level of undistracted focus for that first year, okay? Your relationship needs that kind of focus, okay? Now, and I don't know why this mic just was not set up. That's my fault, I guess. I don't know how to fix that, but all right. Now, Marty's going to watch this back going, I hate when he does that. Well, it's because I had almost nobody here working on sound today. It's not my fault. Okay, now. So men, okay, and women, let's try to be minimally distracted and try to focus on each other as much as you can for the whole marriage, but certainly for that first year to really set the tone and get to know each other really well, right? Especially, remember back here, they didn't know each other that well necessarily. Let's just use an example, okay? We're getting here to the Leverett marriage. Actually, well, let me just finish with these couple of things real quick and then we'll get to that. In verse 6, no one takes the pledge of the lower and the upper millstone. Okay, so understand these are the way how you grind grain. So if you pledge half of it, they can't eat, okay? Okay, because you would be taking a life in the pledge. In other words, that's how they grind their grain. If you take one of the upper or the lower millstone, then how are they going to grind, all right? Okay, 8 and 9 links leprosy to vertical structure, rebellion, okay? So it says, take heed in an outbreak of leprosy to diligently guard and do all according to what the priests, the Levites teach you, as I have commanded them, so you shall guard and do. He says, remember that Yahweh Elohim, what he did to Miriam on the way. Remember he gave her some leprosy? Okay, and so he's linking these things to vertical structure rebellion, okay? Because that's what she was doing, picking on Moses with her brother. They were just not doing well. That's Numbers 12, 1 through 15. So you have that. Verse 16, we're almost done here. Fathers are not put to death for their children. Children are not put to death for their fathers. Each is to die for his own sin. You can read Ezekiel 18, which covers that in more detail, okay? Ezekiel 18, that chapter there covers that in more detail. Okay, but just understand that, it says basically, if your father was righteous and you're not, you don't get to have his righteousness help you out at all. But also says if your father was a sinner, was just awful, and you do what's right, whatever he did was awful won't be held against you either. Okay, each is to die for his own sin. Okay. The do not muzzle an ox while it's threshing is not the universal verse for ministries to use to try to get money out of you. It literally is just telling you that, if you want the ox to do well, you should let it eat while it's threshing, and doing those things so that it can do well. Now, of course, you could see the metaphor how those that are working, some of you do really well. You have somebody come over the house, they're doing a bunch of work, and you offer them something to drink, like a refreshment, or you offer them like a snack or something. It's inspiring to those that are doing the work to make sure that they get to benefit somewhat from it, okay? But no, I'm not going to use this for ministry funding like churches do. All right, now, then we get to verse 5 through 10, the levirate marriage instructions. This goes back to Ruth and Boaz in the book of Ruth, chapter 4, verses 1 to 11. It says, what verse did I want to start at here? Verse 5. Okay, when brothers dwell together and one of them has died and has no son, the widow of the dead man shall not become a stranger outside. Her husband's brother does go into her and shall take her for a wife and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. That would be the levirate marriage thing. And it shall be that the firstborn son which she bears does rise up for the name of the dead brother, so that his name is not blotted out of Israel. Now, then it has all these rules. Okay, that's not the point. The point I want to make is this. Okay, because we don't do this today. This was a cultural thing in Israel, in the land, etc. But I want you to notice something. Where is marrying for love or attraction or your best friend or personal preferences? See, this thing is not. There we go, that's better. Okay? Where's all that in this? Okay? Because if the man doesn't desire to take his brother's wife, to let his brother's wife go up to the gate and go to the elders and complain. Now, I know most of you, if you have a husband with a brother, would be like, hell no, okay? My wife literally said that to me. She said, if you ever die, I'm not marrying one of them, okay? And so she did. It's a true story. And I couldn't blame her. But, this was a different world, and people married differently, okay? They married differently. And so she seemed very much interested in saying, I need to have this for my husband. I need this for the preservation of his name and all these other things, for this child to be born. And so just understand that we are all focused on, marrying for love and for attraction, and I have to marry my best friend and all these personal preferences. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. They weren't looking at any of that, okay? Go watch, Fiddler on the Roof, and watch when Tevye sings, do you love me? And his wife's like, what? I cook for you, I clean with you, I've shared your bed, I've raised all these children. What do you mean, do I love you? I know you did all of those things. They met on their wedding day. That's what it says in the story. They met on their wedding day. And he wanted to know, after 25 years of marriage, but do you love me? That was not an issue in any of this stuff. It's just a different world that we're talking about here, okay? You guys would be appalled if you had arranged marriages today and all these other things that they did all the time here, okay? Just keep that in mind. But this whole thing is what plays out at the end of chapter 4, in chapter 4, at the end of the book of Ruth. Literally, this plays out exactly as it is here, including, throwing the shoe and the whole thing, right? The sandal. All right, now, let's see. And then lastly, and then we'll end with this. It says, look, fairness is still the important thing. You do not have different measures and different weights and things for things in your house, right? It says you're going to have a perfect and right weight and a perfect and right measure so that they prolong their days. In other words, don't cheat people. Treat people fairly. Don't take advantage of people. There's been a bunch of that in this section here, thematically, okay? Don't take advantage of people. All right, so that all being said, that's going to wrap it up for this week's Torah portion. All right, Janet.
Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you for the teaching.
You're welcome.
So you did talk about verse 18, right? 21. You were saying that you're talking about an adult. I guess I wanted to know.
With the disobedient son?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I work with families, right? And in the past, I've had someone who is an underage, a teenager, but there's some serious things that this person has done, right, at home, and there's mental illness, there's a lot of stuff, but I don't want to go into details. But I guess my question really is, how were they dealing with underage? Like at the time, is there any, because the parents have done everything and anything, and they just can't find a way for him, haven't found a way for this guy to really, straighten out. If you have a younger teenager.
Yeah, look,
Yeah.
I think that when we're dealing with the challenges of the youth, and they're very challenging, okay? And I get that. Your primary job, please don't think I sound, I don't know, callous, hard, cold, or something. Your primary job, I'm not saying you don't have a second or third, job, but your first and primary job is to get them alive to out of your house at 20 or 18 or something like that, okay? So that, however you make that work, however you can get them there, that's your primary thing. Some of you think your job is to raise them well so they can be successful. Well, you'd like to try and make the effort, but they're not going to necessarily cooperate with you in that area. Okay, especially if they happen to have disabilities or handicaps or mental health issues, okay? In which case, you bring them to, as early as you can catch this stuff, to those who are professional and see what they can do. And then if that doesn't work, again, it's just sort of a survival mode thing until you can kind of get them to where the professionals can take care of them or whatever has to be happening if they can't take care of themselves. It just depends on how bad the mental health issue is, I mean, there are those that are handicapped with mental health issues that might need to be taken care of their whole life, but they're not giving anybody a hard time, okay? Yeah, all right? I mean, you have one of the most loving children on the planet. He's definitely got his issues, but he's not causing anybody any issues. I don't know how well he can take care of himself, but at least that's a child you would take care of his whole life if you could, and those kind of things, Whereas there are other ones that everything they do seems to be self-destructive and other destructive. So not only are they hurting themselves, but they'll hurt others through their destruction. And that's where at some point you might just have to turn them over to the professionals and say, look, there's nothing more I can do. If this is what you're going to do with your life, then you're going to do it not here destroying this house. It's sad, but you might have to just tell them, I've had teenagers are like, you know what, you teenagers, you're dumb sometimes, okay? Because you'll say things like, I'm going to call the police. The mother should say, good, call them. Why do you think that's going to be good for you? CPS is going to come. Good, let them come. They'll take you, and you'll see that that's not better than this house, okay? I mean, I would call their bluff. Fine, call them. I'll call them. All right, you don't want to be here, go somewhere else. You get to be 16, I'll go sign the papers. You can get yourself emancipated, okay? And you can go out there and figure your own life out. It's not what I want for you as a parent, but I'm not going to sit there and fight with you and literally maybe fight with you because you've gotten so ugly and violent and just family destructive. Okay, then you need to not have that, in your house, okay? And so give them that, give them that choice, I guess. But you're in survival mode till you can find a way to get them out, okay? Now, I'm not saying that about handicapped in general. I'm not saying that about, okay? Sorry, I'm distracted because the cameras can't seem to get whatever they're going on, and I have to listen to what's going on the cameras. All right. Now, I'm not saying that we don't have compassion on handicapped. We should have every possible compassion. But you know what? The handicapped disabled, not the ones just with mental health issues, but the handicapped disabled tend to be the easiest to deal with and most loving of people that I've ever interacted with. And so absolutely, we would take care of them as we can. Even the ones that are reasonably challenging, you do the best you can. But there are those that there's nothing you can do. They're hell-bent on being hell-bent. Okay, so whatever that means, in destroying themselves and the family and everybody around them. Somewhere you have to be wise, and self-preservation has to kick in. You have to say, look, if you can't figure this out, you can go do this in some public facility. And you may think, that's horrible. It's horrible what they're doing to themselves and your family. Okay, and so everybody is now on their last nerve. Everybody is walking on eggshells. Everybody doesn't know when the next blow-up's gonna be. Okay, and so you can't live like that. And when they're old enough, teenagers are old enough, where they can understand you, you say, look, however many more days it is till 18, that door is where you're exiting. I will no longer have the responsibility. You'll have to figure it out. Or you could stay here if you learn to live here in a polite, respectful way while you're working on figuring yourself out. But I'm not going to have you act like this beyond 18. You might think, man, that's harsh. No, that's real. Again, I would let my children, and they were out by 18, one, and the other was out by 20 or 19 or whatever, but I would have let them stay a little longer if they had wanted to, as long as they were working on getting out. You're like, you wanted them out? Of course. They can't grow but up to a point staying in my house. That doesn't mean I don't love them. I'm hurting them by keeping them there. Do you understand that? They are losing ground on their life, on being successful in life, the longer they're in your house. You are not helping, you're hurting the situation. Now, I'm not saying if they're handicapped and disabled and some other thing. If they're just modern day teenagers who are just being lazy and whining about everything, then fine, let them whine outside your house, okay? You think that's hard? The world is hard, and they're woefully unprepared, okay? The world is hard. Look, and I'm old enough see, I came from a generation where this generation can't tell me things are worse now. There was more drugs, more nonsense, more everything when I was their age, okay? We invented it, okay? So I don't want to hear these teenagers going, oh, but today nonsense, okay? I didn't, grow up in with the cleavers, okay? Meaning back with the 50s TV shows, everybody was just all whatever. I grew up in the real world in New York City, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, all right? And you needed to grow up or you were never going to make it. Well, children today, you better grow up or you're not going to make it. And parents, you coddle them, they're not going to make it. You can't coddle them forever. They will be woefully unprepared, okay? Woefully. All right, did that answer that?
Yes, very good, which is aligned with what I've been talking with them about. So thank you for that.
It is hard, man.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine, because I deal with some mental health people, who call on a regular basis, and I try to help them as I can. But they're not the unreasonable, type of mental health issues that are just out there to create problems. They just struggle in some areas, and I deal with them the best I can. But there are others that only want to be a problem, okay? And they don't care what they do to anybody else and the problems they cause for everybody else, and people let them do that, and they shouldn't.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Yeah.
It really inspired me what you said about arranged marriages. The way you were talking about failure of the roof, right? And I work with a variety of clients, and I've had clients from other countries that have that still in the present time. And it made me think about...
I've got people asking me to do it now. I'm not kidding. There are people who say, can you just find me somebody?
Oh, gosh.
But
it made me think how somehow those marriages worked, right? Somehow they knew each of them, their roles, I suppose, and they just did the best with it, and love eventually developed, versus you have some other ones that chose each other for love, whatever, and eventually they don't work out, right? They end up in divorce. It's such a contradiction, right? Anyway, that's my thought. Thank you, Rabbi.
all right, so the vetting, choosing, I don't know, whatever the word is that you want to use for this, that's where the failure is, okay? But I love her, I love him, and then you want a divorce. What happened to that? Okay? Well, because there's more than just that. There's other aspects to the marriage, to the relationship. It could be that there's a role problem. I'll blame the men first. I've got a lot of young ladies out there. If you guys were actually men, you would have your pick of the group, okay? But the problem is you're not. Most of you are just not getting it done. I talk to 50-plus-year-olds, 40-plus-year-olds who can't rub two nickels together, okay? And I'm like, how'd you get there? How'd you get to that place where you can't, afford to even live single on your own? You kidding me? And then you want to get married. Well, who should marry you? I know you guys get mad at me. I'm just being honest. That's what the girls say to me. The ladies say to me. They're like, well, why would I marry that guy? He can't even take care of himself. He can't provide for himself. And then you're going to want her to be submissive. To what? What are you providing? Okay? Ladies, I keep saying this, and if you want the men to fix things, I'll tell you what. Don't marry anybody that isn't ready to provide and protect and take care of you properly. You might not know what that means. Fine, talk to me in a counseling session. Okay, but if they're 40 plus, okay, because we got a lot of single ladies in their 30s and that kind of thing. If they're 40 plus, okay, or even 50 plus, then they should have everything in their life where it needs to be, except the only thing missing is you. Don't be marrying a fixer-upper. That's for 20s. You're dumb and he's dumb and you both are just going to go make the world light it on fire and do whatever. That's fine. Neither one of you knows anything from anything. Who knows how it's going to work out? You don't do that when you're 40 or 35 or 50 or whatever. You're looking for somebody that's already got it all in place. And the ladies are all looking at me like, where are the guys? And my answer is, I don't know. Because they call me going, I don't know how to be a man. Well, that's not the way to sound. You know what a man doesn't do? He doesn't say, I don't know how. He just goes and finds out, figures it out, makes it happen, looks for the resources. But I don't know how to do that. How do you think I learned how to do everything I learned how to do? I started off not knowing how to do it. You always start off not knowing how. And then you go and you figure it out. Okay, my parents didn't give it to me. Nobody gave it to me. I had to go get it. That's what men do. They go out there and get it. All right? Then you find one of them, if there was enough of them, that you find attractive and you have personalities that match up and you guys can be good friends and everything else. Okay? These ladies here in Scripture, they were looking for one thing, provide and protect. Was my children going to be fed? Were we going to have clothing and shelter? Was I going to be safe? Okay? And that's all the parent wanted when the parent was vetting out the guy to marry the daughter. How are you going to take care of her? I had a conversation this week with somebody who wants to marry somebody, and I was like, but how are you going to take care of her? Because the person couldn't. And I was like, then why would they marry you? But I'm a nice guy. She thinks I'm a nice guy. Okay, that doesn't pay bills. It doesn't create a lifestyle. I can tell you this now because I'm 63, okay? Some of you watching always wonder, like, I wonder how old he is. Well, I'm 63. Now, you start maybe at 30 or 40, you're thinking, oh, when I retire and I'll be like 50-something or 60-something, whatever. You know what, you get here, there's still stuff to do. You're still busy. You're still trying to knock the ball out of the park. So that life doesn't come at the end of something. You have to enjoy it along the way. You have to create that along the way. Thinking you'll do it later, it'll never happen. Okay? So you have to be building a life where you can happen while you're doing the other things. Where you can take the trips and do the experiences and whatever it is that you want to do. Otherwise, you're never going to get there. And you got to be, when you're younger especially, tunnel vision, focused, get it done. Because then they'll be lining up to marry you.
I have a question that is not directly related to this parsha, but I thought perhaps you might be willing to answer it for me.
Sure.
If someone is called to testify in a court case, is it okay if they swear an oath to tell the truth?
You can, oh, and I put this too high. There we go. You can affirm, you can so affirm. I mean, they let you do that now in the courts, They just want you to, state out loud that you're making a commitment to tell the truth.
So just affirm and not swear.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
And they usually will give you the choice. You can say, I so affirm, or something like that. Okay?
Thank you so much.
Okay. And I don't know that the swearing thing is such a bad thing either. I mean, it gets to be one of those things that the church really made a big deal out of. Just let your yea be yea and your nay be nay. And if the court requires this little ritual of out loud confirming that you're going to tell the truth. Of course, I don't think that ever prevented anybody from lying. They still get up there and say whatever they're going to say anyway. I don't know that that really affects anything. But
in 21 verses 14 through 17, there is import of the firstborn male regardless of the wife. How does this contract with Abraham's firstborn, Isaac's first, and Jacob's firstborn, that none of these got the inheritance?
Okay, so the problem had to do with, in a lot of the cases, it had to do with disqualification. Okay, not so much the one loved versus the one unloved. Okay, and so this is this is really a qualifier for saying, hey, be careful how you treat these people. All right. I mean, we don't skip over Reuben because he didn't like Leah. We skip over Reuben because Reuben screwed up. And then keep going down the line. We don't know about everybody how they screwed up, but they do till we get to Joseph. Okay, and then Joseph earns the blessing. Okay, and the same thing with Jacob and Esau. Esau sold it. Okay, so there is not any of these things where there's any evidence that the unloved, wife had the baby and they got skipped over because of the loved wife. There's lots of evidence that there's reasons to skip over people that they brought on themselves, okay? It wasn't just about the mother.
All right, from Sarah Gibbs. I know people who have argued for Judaism, each is to die for his own sin versus Yeshua taking the penalty of death. What's their misunderstanding?
Okay, the misunderstanding is look, when you look at the idea of the penalty, all right? So Yeshua didn't die and was killed because we sinned. In other words, he wasn't punished for us. He did a substitutional redemptive act. Do you understand the difference? Okay? In other words, if my father was a horrible sinner, okay, I'm not going to be punished for his sin. That's what the verse says. Yeshua wasn't punished for our sins. Yeshua did something redemptive, substitutionary. Okay? He said, Father, in the ultimate death, take me, not them. Not in this physical life, because everybody still dies in this physical life. Okay? But in the ultimate, this is talking about a whole, that second death issue, right? And so there's a big difference there, right? There's not an issue with each one dies for his own sin, because that's talking about punishment, right? Ezekiel is talking about punishment, Ezekiel 18. Here in Deuteronomy, it's about punishment for the sin. I'm not going to be punished because you sinned if I didn't. Yeshua wasn't punished. Nowhere does it say he was punished for our sins. He gave of himself redemptively for something that was coming beyond. See, this whole thing in Ezekiel and in Leviticus and Deuteronomy and all these other places is all talking about this flesh life and what we bring upon ourselves in this flesh life. Yeshua did something that's beyond this flesh life. It's whether or not we get ultimate life.
All right, from Pepita. In Matthew, it says Joseph was righteous, so he intended to put Mary away secretly. How does his putting her away a righteous act rather than a divorce?
Okay, so her being pregnant would not qualify as a putting away offense. It would qualify as as a divorce offense. It would only qualify as a putting away offense. So it would either be adultery if he could prove it, or some other sexual immorality that led to her being pregnant, but not by him. So putting away would have been his choice. Okay, that would have been the option legally or whatever, structurally with the culture and the laws and the Torah for that. So not divorce. Plus, he couldn't really divorce her at this point because they weren't actually married, they were engaged. They hadn't gotten there yet, okay? It was during the betrothal when this happens. And so you can't even really go that route.
All right, from Donna Stevens, this one's a two-parter from 21 verse 10. Carrying on from verse 9, when you do what is right in the eyes of Yah, and you go out to fight your enemies, failing inner characteristics, Yah will deliver the enemy into your hand. We have to focus on the enemy to take it into captivity. We can only win if aligned with Yah. Can we look at ourselves as the captive woman, readying ourselves to be taken as a wife for Yeshua?
Donna, I love the stuff you write. I'm not sure that plays out the way you finished it up there. I'm not sure that this makes us like sort of the captive woman. Because the captive woman wasn't really readying herself for the husband. It was more a test to see if the husband really wanted her. Okay, so she wasn't really readying herself. They took away her beauty. It was a test for him. It really wasn't about her. So I think that this doesn't probably match up as well as it started sounding like it was going to be good, but I think it went sideways at the end there.
All right, from Dale Hersey, Rabbi, do you see these portions of Torah being reinstated in the forever kingdom, or because all is pure, there's no need?
Okay, let's bear in mind that there are we'll call it three stages of time, right? There's now, the world as we know it, the flesh world and all that stuff. Within that time frame, at the end of it, there's a millennial thing that's still in this flesh world as we know it, okay? And I think during that time, a lot of this stuff may be reinstituted because we'll be under Yeshua and as a cohesive group in the world, etc. And then there's the forever kingdom, which we're talking about Revelation 21, when there's a new heaven and new earth. And it doesn't look like most of these things will be being instituted this way because we'll have become what it was intended to make us become. Okay? I don't know if there's a better way to word that, but that doesn't mean we're not going to be acting according to the way we treat people the right way and the way we look at him the right way, because that'll just be what we are at that point. Okay? But a lot of this mechanical stuff is meant for flesh and blood human beings in, this world as it exists now and will still exist through the millennium. And then nobody really understands. It does talk about a little bit to some degree, but nobody really understands what that's going to look like, Revelation 21 to the end. Okay? It's going to be whatever it's going to be.
From DCI Industries, Simon Gibbs. Rabbi, you said earlier that pants had not been invented, but the priest had linen trousers. I assume that was the only place pants would have existed?
Right, but they had and I was going to mention that. They were the only ones that had it specifically mentioned to use for specific things when doing what they were doing, okay? But that was not what people usually wore. That was only the priests for the specific things. And they wore that, it would appear, under the robes or whatever they normally would wear, the special garments that were made for them, okay? Because they had these special garments made for them. There was a shirt and there was the other parts of it, right? Okay? But you don't see generally, when I say generally, like 99.9% of the people, nobody's wearing pants, okay? So it can't be what they're talking about.
In 21 verses 18 through 23, the wayward and rebellious son is stoned. The man who commits a sin worthy of death is hung on a tree, but is to be buried the same day. Were there differences in the crimes that determined the punishment received? Was the man hanged, taken down because he was made in the image of Yah? No matter how man is, we must always remember he is created in the image of Yah.
Look, You know what? What we don't have is the nice legal volumes that would be on an attorney's wall in their bookcase. So for this kind of law for back then, it's not real clear what stoning was for, what the hanging from a tree was for. It seemed like most things were stoning. Okay, this is one of the only places it mentions hanging somebody from a tree. So it just doesn't tell us what punishment gets you hung from a tree, and so. But we're told that if that's done, you don't leave them up there, okay? And, does it have to do with being made in the image of Yah? Look, I think it had to do with what I said it had to do with, the idea of not wanting to do public shaming. It's punishment, not public shaming.
When we talk about a woman who didn't cry out when taken by a man, how does this apply when a woman has a freeze or fawn response?
Okay, so... I don't know. Basically, it's most likely, okay, that there's, I guess the way the culture and those kind of things, it's just that she had to speak up or whatever it is, as opposed to it just being found out, okay? So after the freeze fawn response, did she go and report it? Did she go and point it out? Did she go and, you understand what I'm saying? Because there's verses in there that say something about, and when they get found out. Well, that's a different problem. That was for the single woman and the single guy, and when they go out in the field and, whatever, and it's like, well, they got found out, okay? Okay, the whole thing about being found out as opposed to, did she cry out or not? Did she make a point or not, or whatever? Because even with the freeze fawn response, that's in that moment as opposed to afterwards, okay? It says, when a man finds a girl who is a maiden, is not engaged, and seizes and lies with her, and they are found out, okay, that's a different thing than it being reported, okay? So somehow, when the man took the woman out in the field and seized her, okay, and she was engaged, well, and she didn't cry out or she did cry out, how does anybody know? She reported it. Somebody reported it. And they're saying, well, this one that happens in the city, all right, well, if she didn't cry out, if she never said anything to anybody, and then it gets found out, then that means she was complicit. She didn't have any issue with it. You understand what I'm saying? So it's a matter of, she could have wanted that adultery. She could have wanted that, is what they're saying. If she didn't want it, she would have said something. Now, not necessarily in that freeze fawn response, at the moment, but afterwards. So it's not just saying, because you can't tell me that you can't be in a city somewhere where you can have this happen and she can cry out all she wants and nobody's going to hear her. That's not the point. The point is, at least afterwards, she will have reported it, then they could have gone and researched it and decided what the deal is. I think that was probably more likely what was going on here. So hopefully, Janelle, that answered that question. All right. You said that was the last one? Yes, sir. All right. Excellent.